The war in Israel has entered its fourth day. The death toll has crossed the 1,500 mark on both the sides of the war. Hamas has threatened to execute Israeli civilian hostages for attacks on Gaza without prior warning. The hostage situation remains precarious in Israel. The question is that what are the options on table for Netanyahu? Is there any diplomatic solution to the crisis? To answer all these questions and much more, we're now being joined by Charlotte Littlewood, journalist and head of the UK-India desk for the International Centre for Sustainability. Thank you so much for joining us on WION, Charlotte.
Thank you so much for having me today. It's a really awful time, and I'm very glad to be able to speak to you.
Right, Charlotte, unprecedented times. Now, the hostage situation is getting precarious in Israel. Hamas has threatened to execute one Israeli captive for every further unannounced Israeli attack on the civilians in Gaza. How do you see Israel tackling this situation?
I think, when we think about how Israel has behaved in hostage situations in the past, if we look back to 2011, where Israel actually swapped 1,027 Palestinian prisoners that were responsible for over 500 Israeli deaths just for one soldier. However, this may be different contextually, and also there is no knowledge at the moment about where these hostages are. And we do know that some hostages have been killed by attacks from Israel on Gaza. So I think it's going to be very difficult indeed. But we do know that the heart of Israel is to do all it can for these hostages. So it will change the way in which it would ordinarily deal with the situation, but perhaps not to the extent that it was able to in 2011.
Right, Charlotte. Also, how big is the crisis in terms of numbers of foreign nationals that have also been taken hostage? And like you mentioned, we don't know about their location as of now. But out of 130 Israeli civilians who have been taken hostage by the militant group, a lot of them are foreign nationals.
Yes, I mean, just from what we've seen in the news, we've seen that there are those from Thailand. I think there's 11 from America that are presumed dead, and I know that there are some from Scotland as well. I myself am from Scotland, and it was really difficult actually seeing the scenes of the party. I've spent 2 years living on and off actually in the West Bank and moving between the West Bank and Israel. So to see these scenes, you really feel like you could have been there.
Right. And in the latest, Hamas has said that the group is open to discussions over a possible truce with Israel. Do you see any possibility of that happening anytime soon?
That kind of conversation is not on the table right now. I think this breach into Israel's territory has utterly humiliated what is a world-respected defense force and defense systems. And Netanyahu has to respond now to show full strength, and I think that's all he can do, considering the push that there will be to have him step down for this kind of insurrection into Israel.
Right, Charlotte. Now, Iran has been accused of supporting Hamas, and the US is still refraining. Is the United States of America overlooking this not being withdrawn in the ongoing war in Israel?
I think this is a really difficult question. America obviously doesn't want to be drawn into what could turn into another war in the Middle East. However, if it becomes more clear of Iranian involvement, and if you just look at the way Iranian citizens are responding and protesting against the regime, you've even seen Iranians in France protesting against Hamas and holding Israeli flags. So you can see that the people of Iran very much are blaming Iran for this. It's actually inspirational to see. But unless there is solid evidence of Iranian involvement, we won't see escalation. However, if there is evidence of Iranian involvement, I think it's inevitable that America has to become involved in some way.
Absolutely. Also, the world, like you mentioned, it remains extremely divided over the war in Israel, with half the factions and the countries supporting the Hamas militant group, while the other in support of Israel. And just a few hours ago, Netanyahu asked Gaza residents to leave for other countries. But where do they go from here? What are the options at hand for the residents of Gaza?
From what I understand, they were originally advised to move through the gate into Egypt, but that is now closed. So it is absolutely unthinkable what is now going to happen to the innocents in Gaza, the women and the children, those that do not support terror. That this will be an inevitable result of a war that now cannot be avoided. And I hate to think if this also moves into the West Bank too. There'll be nothing but losers on both sides for what Hamas has done here.
Last question to you. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke to US President Joe Biden and said that Israel has no choice but to launch a ground operation in Gaza. And we've been seeing the airstrikes from the Israeli side on the Gaza Strip. But how do you see Washington's role in this? Because the White House has clearly said that there are no plans for US boots on the ground in Israel.
I think everything is moving very quickly, and anything that is said presently may not be said tomorrow or the next day. I think that's something to watch as we come to learn who's been involved in this. It's unbelievable that Hamas did this by themselves. So I think we need to see what evidence comes to fore, and then we'll see how the West will then react to that evidence. I think what's very clear is we've seen a lot of pro-Hamas activism across the West, which has just made it a stark reality that we are harboring extremists and terrorist sympathizers in our own countries that are propping up evil terrorist regimes across the world. Canada has come under a lot of speculation for this in recent weeks, and now we're seeing these celebrations of terror across the West. It's due time for introspection for the West and how it's tackling extremism and how it moves forward from here.
Right, Charlotte. Thanks very much for taking our time and joining us on WION with your insights.